And now I get to introduce the second BVC brief today, Barriers to Female Founders. Where are all the ladies?
Right here.
Please welcome to the stage Diane Fraiman and Allie Magyar.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Just a few short years ago, I was actually in the pitch competition, so it's like coming home again. I'm Allie Magyar, and I am currently founder and CEO of Hubb. We do software for the meetings and events industry. But I am also a mother, I'm a wife, and I'm a female entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, since about 21 years ago. So I've gone through a lot of ups and downs in my career, and I'm extremely passionate about helping other women and other startups succeed. So really grateful to be here today.
Thanks, Allie. And I'm Diane Fraiman. I'm a managing director with Voyager Capital. We do early stage B2B software investing. And I had 25 years prior to going to the dark side of venture of being on the operational side of sales, marketing, and business development for very large companies and for early stage venture-backed companies. And I am also very passionate about women in this business. So Allie and I have 20 minutes to solve world hunger. And really, we decided that the two subjects we would discuss, which is really going to shake some of you up, is emotions and men. Because why not? So if we sort of start with this issue of being an early stage entrepreneur and a founder, it has got to, male, female, doesn't matter, right? It's got to be one of the most lonely, scary, hard, terrifying jobs ever. It doesn't really matter where you come in and how much experience you have. So my question to you, Allie, to sort of start this off is, what gave you the emotional backbone to do what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about my entrepreneurial journey, the number one word that sticks with me is grit. Because for 21 years, I've been all over the spectrum almost daily. Yesterday, I was super excited because we closed McDonald's as a customer. Today, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning freaking out about some software development that we have. So through that time, grit is really what got me through that. And I think it's also what helped to encourage me to take that leap.
When you were a little kid, were you like one of these kids that was just always out there, like pushing things forward, being loud, being busy?
Yeah, I got called bossy, which is not a word that I love all that much anymore, but that was definitely a part of who I was. I loved to organize people and things, and I loved to take risk. And so I was really fortunate to have a community behind me, whether that was my parents, teachers, other adult influences, that helped to encourage that. Because as a child, if you can learn to fail, and that you can recover from that and build from that learning, it helps you to get more comfortable with that leap that you have to take.
Were you ever fired from a job?
Well, I started my first company when I was 18. So what I would equate to being fired from a job is being fired by a customer. And so yes, and it hurts.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I was fired once. I was fired by actually a man that ultimately apologized for it later on, but was probably one of the biggest learning experiences that I ever had. You know, my emotional bent was, I was always very assertive and independent, but I wanted financial independence, right? I mean, for me, it was, I never wanted to ask my father for money. It was, I wanted to pay for the apartment, I wanted to pay for the car, and I wanted to pay for a bottle of wine every Friday night. Honestly.
Important things.
Important things. I mean, that was great. You know, if the car insurance could get paid also, that was okay. So this financial insurance, when I figured out, independence, when I figured out that I could actually work hard and get paid, and then continue to work hard and get paid more, right? The money was a big motivator. And then that I liked it. But that was like, I could not be dependent on somebody else was something that really drove me.
And how did that carry with you throughout your career and throughout the different transitions that you had of early stage being driven by some of those things? How did you find that evolved over time?
You know, I started as a sales guy, right? I mean, so what I found was I could sell. I was an engineer by education. I never thought I thought when someone said you should go sell computers, Diane, that That was like a car salesman to me. If there are any car salesmen in here, I apologize. But I really thought that was like, I didn't get all this education to go sell. And what I found was that if you can extract dollars from wallets from other people, that was a real skill.
Absolutely.
That sort of carried through regardless of whether you were in sales, marketing, business development, probably not coding, but short of that. And so I got confidence in my ability to ask people for money. And as a result of that, again, this sort of financial independence thing, it gave me confidence to keep going. But the reality was that, I'm old. I basically had men along the way who basically moved me along, right? Who saw that I could commit and deliver to something, whether I was terrified of getting out there or not, and would continue to help me as I went on my path, right?
And how did that support look? Was it something that you had asked for? Was it something where they saw potential and opportunity and invested in you? What did that relationship look like?
I didn't learn to ask for a long time. Did you?
No. Yeah.
I mean, it's a really interesting question. I didn't learn to ask for a raise or a job increase, or a promotion. I've talked about this in the past. What I did learn to do early on was to say yes to opportunity, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
It's almost like you didn't have any, reason not to.
Right.
So, but I didn't learn to ask for a very, very long time.
I think that might be a part of, as someone that has an entrepreneurship mindset, it's the ability to do, to be able to take that risk, and regardless of what the barriers are, maybe you're just going to force forward with some of those actions. Because I found myself in the same spot where, 18, I loved show and race cars, like the Fast and the Furious. And so I decided I wanted to throw car shows. And I didn't ask, I just said, okay, I'm going to take my $1,000 of savings and rent out this fairgrounds and have this event. And so what I found is that I would just put that brute force. I would make those decisions, and I would try to gather people around me to make those things happen. But as I've grown in my career, I think finding that capacity to ask and engage definitely helps you to broaden your horizon and your skill set.
Right. Even when you're faking it.
Even when you're faking it. And
Yeah.
I think, that's an interesting thing. As you grew up in your career, what did confidence feel like for you in your career?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, I think, again, male or female, everyone's faking it. I think we'd be lying to ourselves if we weren't. In order to succeed, in order to win in a competitive environment, you got to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and basically go for it. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, right? So I think this issue of realizing that, you got to step out there and have the confidence to just ask or do, number one. Number two, you might fail.
Absolutely. I have found myself, I actually remember doing it at the Ben Venture Conference where I stood backstage, did my Superwoman pose, took a whole bunch of breaths, looked at myself in the mirror and said, you're going to rock this, when I was just ready to crumble because it was scary. And I think confidence is something that everyone struggles with, but I have found myself over years as a woman as well, I think that is something that I have struggled with because what I didn't want to happen was what I saw so much of in our community outside of the Northwest was bravado. It was bro culture. And it was a bunch of bragging and unrealistic goals and really not having a plan in place. And I saw that and I didn't want to be that, but it was hard to find that mixture of bravado and confidence and humility of that I'm still learning and I'm still failing every day.
Well, it's okay to be a girl, too.
Absolutely.
Right? I think one of our strengths is that we're not a boy. And I'm just saying. I've had this conversation at times with younger women who it's like we should all be equal and everyone should be equal and it should all be treated equal and everything should be, there shouldn't be any gender bias or gender screen on this. And that's really a bunch of bullshit because the reality is, right, one of our strengths is that we're not male, right? One of our strengths is that we do communicate differently. One of our strengths is that, in fact, that is why there is such a push to diverse organizations, to diverse teams. We hear differently, we communicate differently, but you have to have confidence that you don't have to be the same, right? It's okay to have some fun. It's okay to have, whether that is this light flirtation or this joking around or whatever that emotional bond is in a mixed room, that's a strength that we have versus something that we should try to not lean into, right?
Yeah, and I think that authenticity is such a huge piece of really reaching your full potential, because if you're trying to hide that or do something different than what comes naturally to you,
it's not going to work for you, right?
No, not at all. Yeah. And it's difficult maybe sometimes when you go into situations and you're in a room full of people that are not like you, to be able to have that confidence to be authentically yourself. But what I've found is that's what sets you apart from the crowd, because there's going to be 1,000 other people that are all there, that all look the same, talk the same, feel and think the same. So you don't really stand out. And I think leaning into our female tendencies and really showing how those are a strength in our organization helps to lead by example.
I would agree completely. I was flying over here, and I'm looking at my friend, Mr. Bullock, sitting right over there. Brent looked at me and he said, one of the things that would be really interesting for you guys to talk about for the men that are in the audience is what can they do in order to help move the gender equality, I'll call it issue, I guess. I'm not sure issue is the right word, to be honest with you. Move it along, right? Is there something you can say? And I said to Brent, this is a very complex problem, because looking at all the men in the room, I think we've terrified you. I mean, honestly, I think that, I sit in boardrooms, I sit with CEOs. I think we have terrified the men recently or over time in not knowing what the heck to do with us, right? Not knowing how to behave with us sitting in the boardroom, having us sit in the leadership position, and I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem for the women that we have to solve. And I think there's a balancing act here on this.
Absolutely. And I think part of it is just by starting to have those conversations. I think when there's something that is taboo in the room and people are anxious about, I used to work with Microsoft in their accessibility program. And so I would be so anxious about saying the wrong thing to someone because my intent was to help them. Yeah. And so what I found is the more I leaned into that and just said, you're in a wheelchair. I don't know what that means. How do I get you to the stage? How do I get you to a place where you can really feel a part of this group? When I was authentic in that conversation with them and told them, I'm a little terrified that I'm going to say something not right, so please correct me. I think it's the opportunity to start to have those real conversations and real dialogue without prejudice one way or another.
And put people at ease. I mean, anyone who knows me knows I'm a hugger. That really terrifies some men now. They start going like this, I'm like, no, let me come on in, There's got to be a way here that we can basically both help the men help us, and I say that not because we need help, but because we're all in this together. Absolutely. And statistically, the good news is statistically, the numbers are moving in the right direction. They're moving slowly, I can say that, but if you look outside of just tech for a moment, things are better than they were, but it's fragile. It's really, really fragile. And I would say, there are regulations now, these regulations about percentage of women on boards and things like, all of these things are just fine. I've had conversations with women as it relates to, this issue of we should all be treated equal and everyone should know that. And I said, when I was coming into the workplace in the late 70s, I was filling a quota. I mean, literally, there were quotas for women in companies, and I was a female engineer. And if I hadn't stepped through that door, because I didn't give a hoot. If the way I got in there was because I was filling a quota, so be it. If the way you were going to get in there is because someone's going to basically say there got to be so many women on a board, so be it. If somehow we've got to figure out how to help each other, I think, and specifically help the guys figure out, because we need them to help make this move along, I think.
Absolutely, and the collaboration together means that businesses
so much
are
stronger.
More powerful, right?
So much
and
stronger.
So if we figure out how to lean into, and this isn't just male, female, this is people throughout our organizations.
Right. Female to female as well. I mean, let's just go there for a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know how many women in this room here basically have had an experience where the woman above them has been far worse than any man that they've ever worked with. I mean, and that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch
it's
how
truly just ridiculous.
when there are some women in the room, and maybe it's a smaller group, and so competition starts to come up. And
I mean, what the heck is that all about?
I have no idea, but I think that's part of just how do we collaborate together, and how do we just normalize that situation to say what are your unique skill sets and strengths, and what are mine, and how do we work together to make the best for the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a 12-year-old, right?
I do. It's a scary thing to say I have a 12-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you doing with her? I mean, you know, you've got so much that, you know, you obviously are passionate about in terms of wanting her to be independent and strong, whatever she may be. What do you do?
Yes. And I have a daughter who is very different from me and she has so much emotion. And she is so terrified and has been since a little girl about failure. And that, to me, is something that is the biggest obstacle for her to overcome. And so I've started really young asking her, what did you fail at today? And what did you learn? And trying to normalize that failure is just learning.
Probably be good in some businesses as well to ask that question every day.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, as we start to think about, I mean, I wake up every day, and I mean, I can't even count the amount of failures that I've made in business over 20 years. And I think people look at that and think, I have to be perfect, and I have to hit, you know, right on the nose, especially when you feel some extra pressure, whether it's because you're a woman or maybe a man in a different position. And so we really have to think about how we treat failure. So I'm trying to encourage my daughter to think about what does failure actually mean, and how does she just take that leap every day of trying something new and being something new. And honestly, it's also being her advocate. I had a teacher last year tell me, you know, kids in class are intimidated by Gabby because she's bossy. And I about lost my mind. That teacher will no longer talk to me, by the way, because it was then about a half an hour conversation about how we're raising our children and what we're doing to encourage leadership skills. And she's 12. She doesn't have the perfect leadership skills, but what she has is she has that inside gumph that's going to make her take that step, that grit.
Yeah, she got mama's grit.
She did. And we need to encourage that with our younger generation so that they know that it's okay, because in a world of everything being perfect from the outside, people sometimes look at my social media accounts or look at PR and they think, oh, that's perfect. They do not know the hell that is every single day. And I think any entrepreneur in this room understands that. So we need to do our best to be transparent in our conversations and help provide the environment for those around us to succeed.
I think that's important. I think, are we going to do some Q&A? Or we can just keep talking up there. So, got one here. Not you, of course, but I know.
But I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on, you know, the biases that you know are structured around women as well, but the biases that men feel in that same dynamic that is so much bigger than business, right? Like empathy, right? Being thought of as a traditionally feminine trait, right? But it's a component of emotional intelligence that any person in business or sales or marketing needs to know. Male or female.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You know, and so I'm interested in your thoughts on how to address that as part of the dialogue, not just, you know, to help, you know, empower women, but also to empower men to empower women and other diverse, you know, workforces.
You know, I'm lucky. I'm married to a man that is very empathetic, who, you know, he cries at movies and, you know, things like that. Don't ever tell him I said that. But you know, if I look at men, and I think it's an excellent question, because in the same way that Allie is talking about empowering her 12-year-old daughter to basically have grit, how do you empower the 12-year-old boy to realize that it's okay to care, right? To have empathy, to have what is sometimes perceived as a weakness, that, you know, it's not all about the playing field and you got to be tough. And No, we haven't, and I think that's also part of the problem that we end up with then as we get older in this. I think it is a full circle, and I think it's an excellent question, and God knows I don't have an answer for it. You might.
Yeah, one of the ways, at least in the workforce, that I have looked at doing is when I'm looking at crafting jobs within our organization, that I'm looking at that holistically, not only with the work that needs to be done, but some of the characteristic traits that need to happen there as well. And so when we think about success in our organization, emotional IQ is one of the best things that you can have as a person.
Absolutely true.
Regardless of what position it is. So I think we have an opportunity to just talk about what is emotional IQ, right? Because it can mean so many of those softer traits that people traditionally look at.
And listen, all I do all day long now is have people pitch me ideas. And I will say it is majority is men. I very quickly evaluate this issue of emotional IQ. And it shows itself in many different ways. It shows itself in the way the ego, in the listening, in the assertiveness, in the I, me. It is the best CEOs. Everyone has an ego. Everyone's got to be tough, right? But the best CEOs have that balance in it. Back there.
Hi. My question, you touched a little bit more on the age of women supporting women, but I feel like there is this, sorry, bring that far. Hello.
Hello.
The undertone of competition. In your experience, how has competition positively and negatively affected your career path, especially with women in the workplace?
You want to take that first?
Sure. I think it depends on how you look at competition. There is the cutthroat, I'm going to kill you no matter what competition, which is a negative competition. And then there's the competition, like I was just talking to Fritz earlier, and we're like, hey, let's have some conversations about whose issue is the biggest right now, right? But it's leaning into that competition and really having real conversations around it. So I think I've found that when I look at competition, I'm a very competitive person, and I have been all my life. And I think that's one of the things that has led to the success of being an entrepreneur, is because you're always looking for what's next and what's bigger. But what I'm not doing is comparing myself to the woman to my left. I'm comparing myself to what I want to achieve. And when I have that conversation with the woman on my left, I want to encourage her to ask, what is that you're trying to achieve? And then we can say, oh, I got $100,000 in sales this month and we're competing on it, but it's friendly because it's not against each other, it's both towards the future.
Yeah, I would agree. Listen, I'm competitive. I'm milestone driven. You give me a goal, and I'm hell-bent to make that goal. And I may not get to that goal in a direct path. It may take me a bit to get there, but that's in my DNA, right? And yeah, I was like that as a kid on playing field or in sports, and I was like that in school. I don't know why. It's probably why I never was a developer in terms of just sitting as a one. I need to have people around me that I can almost be comparative to, in terms of, we're gonna meet that goal. And so that's how I'm built, right? Which meant I was good at sales versus other things. But having said that, it was never in order to kill somebody else, right? This issue of I'm gonna win at your loss, right? And yeah, maybe sometimes someone has to lose if it's a sports game or whatever, but I'm going to win at your loss is not what we've got to try and do here. That's the hard part. And it's funny, I don't see that being a woman's problem. What upsets me with women with other women is women get mean. And that's, manifests itself in different ways. It's not even a matter of I'm going to beat you. It's I'm going to control you. It's mean. And that's the piece that's got to stop. Yeah. Oh.
Good thing those are soft.
Yeah, we'll do you, and then we'll get you right there, too.
Hi. So I'm really curious, Diane, especially from you, to hear about in venture capital and sort of when you're deploying capital generally, there's not really any question that's off limits, technically, unlike an employment practice where we've really institutionalized and tried to protect against discrimination. Mm-hmm. Do you see that being something that could change? I guess there's always this challenge of having to assess the individual.
You're talking about specifically in venture capital?
Yeah. And
it's the worst.
I guess, is there a way for there to be changes, just like, I guess, the nature of what you have to understand and know about a person and a business?
And I've said this openly in a lot of places. I came up through tech. I was always the only girl in the room. I happened to have been with different bosses who always took care of me and promoted me. I always delivered against the goals. It was a fabulous career. I made the jump over to venture capital. I have never in my life been in such a all-boys network, and I don't mean because it's men. I'm used to being with all men. I'm talking about it's a club.
Yeah.
And it's a little better. I've been doing this now for 13 years. It's a little better. It's gotten, there's more women coming out of business school that want to go into venture, and so they're coming up through the ranks. So it's changing. It's now very hip to basically have at least one partner in every venture firm so that you can say, I've got a woman. You gotta be strong. I am very against that this is going to get solved through litigious means. I am really, there can be some really egregious things, but forget that. Very few of them are. Most of it's just, it's tough. It's a tough workplace. And we've got to be tough. But the only way I know to do that is to be successful. You got to deliver. You got to be, maybe you got to be better sometimes, but you got to deliver. And if we deliver, then, I think this starts to get easier. But I am really opposed to this being solved through, litigious different aspects.
And I could speak from a different perspective because I've now raised $10 million for Hubb. And so last year, I ended up speaking with over 60 private equity and venture capital companies from around the country in a series of a couple of months.
How many women, Allie?
Yeah, very few. I got a lot of what looked like my grandpa patting me on the head and telling me, honey, you have a nice little business, congratulations, when I'm outperforming every portfolio company that they have. So I would say that period of time for me was actually one of the roughest I have ever gone through, because even though my numbers were on point and I was performing and I could back up anything that anyone asked me, I still was getting, well, we're going to give you a valuation of half of market. Well, tell me why. Well, just because that's what we're willing to give. It's what the market drives.
You're not proven, and but it's crap.
And so it is, and most of the time it wasn't women partners, it wasn't women there, and it just had a very different feel to raising venture capital. Now, what I will say is that I ended up going with a firm that doesn't have any women, but they were so culturally aligned and were so driven by what we were doing in our industry that they were the right partners for me. But I did see a difference in those venture firms that did have women. I had someone from Madrona. It was one of the first venture capital companies that I pitched. She pulled me into her office after I pitched and basically ripped me to shreds for about 20 minutes. Every slide, she was like, you're telling the story wrong here. You need to do this. You need to tell the story this way. Because it was my first time pitching to venture capital. Yeah. That might have happened too. But
it was my first time pitching.
Versus angel investors. But she took me under her wing and helped me to craft the message that eventually helped me to be successful there. And I think it was that little bit of extra something where I felt like I could relate and she felt like she could really help me in that capacity. And man or women, it wouldn't have mattered who helped me in that capacity, but walking into a room and seeing diversity instantly puts you at ease. So I think a lot of it is continuing the conversation. I'm a big believer. I also don't agree with suing over everything because then everyone is terrified, right? But I am a big believer of standing up in that room and saying, guys, I don't know if you know what unconscious bias is, but I'm going to tell you right now, this is unconscious bias, and let me explain to you why I am not accepting your offer from my company. And telling them exactly what is going on. So I think it really comes from all of us, from executing, knowing our shit, being good at business, but also being willing to stand up for ourselves and have that conversation to turn the tide.
Exactly. I think you had a question over there. Right behind you. Yep.
Hi, so I'm a student at Oregon State University, and my class just taught us about making big bets. So I was wondering, when you were talking about independence and having the confidence, what happens, like how do you pick yourself back up if you don't accomplish your big bet?
How do you pick yourself back up?
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's very hard. My first business, when I was 18, I talked about car shows. So one car show grew to 2, grew to 4, grew to 10 over 6 years. And I was managing all these car shows around the country. And I ended up having a really bad run. And a trade show, if you don't get the gate, you don't have any money. And so my first company, I ended up $100,000 in debt with what I felt like no options for a career. And so that feeling that you're talking about, I felt it deep into my core. Because most of us have issues with that negative voice. It's like you wake up in the morning, everything's blissfully okay for about 30 seconds, right? Until your brain starts spinning. And then it's all the negativity, all the things that are going to go wrong, right? That is just something that I think we deal with as a human condition. And so a lot of it is telling yourself the right story. And I know that sometimes that feels a little bit crazy, but when I've failed big, I look at it and say, what did I learn? What am I never going to repeat again in my life? And how am I going to apply this in a way that I'm so much stronger to doing that? And sometimes it takes every morning getting up and talking into the mirror and saying, you're going to rock today, and this is the skill set that you're going to use, and this is the small little accomplishment that you're going to get today. Because for me, it's those small incremental steps back in so that you build up that confidence to then take the leap again when it happens, because that cycle never ends. It's just how you end up dealing with it.
I would add one final thing, which I have always done, which is you walk out the door, you put a smile on your face, and you let them wonder. It confuses the hell out of everybody who thinks that basically you should feel like crap. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Hey, I'm also a student at Oregon State University, and I was just wondering, I've been seeing a lot of this lately, but how do you feel about companies that are being applauded only because of hiring a certain percentage of women?
I missed that.
Being applauded only because they're hiring so many women.
Some of the quota things that you were talking about earlier of companies getting recognition for having diversity in their workforce.
I don't know. Again, there's not a lot of that's going on, but my feeling is if it differentiates you, take it. Honestly, whatever differentiates you. If you were a product, I sit there and talk about product market fit all day long with these companies, right? How are you going to find product market fit? If you were the product and you found a hole in that market, and that market happened to be that you were an all-woman firm that was basically doing blank, and that differentiated you from the other guys, hopefully your product is good, right? Just walk through the door and take it. Right? I mean, you are still going to have to deliver. You are still the next day going to have to be better. You're still going to have to, figure out how to win. But if the slightest little thing differentiates you, and that happens to be that you're a woman, you go for it. We already did you. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is the last question.
So I remember you talked a bit about confidence versus humility and just trying to find a good balance between those. I personally struggle with that a lot, and I feel like a lot of the especially female role models in the entertainment industry and a lot of things that are being pushed at young females right now is so much confidence and so much excuse my friend for badassness that some of that humility and kindness and empathy is being lost.
I hope not.
I hope not too, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
But you realize from listening to us, hopefully, listen, we can go out there and I know many of the women in this room, and kick ass every day. We go home, we're exhausted, we're depressed, we're upset, we need our glass of wine. Some of this, it is no different than the guys, right? You gotta pick yourself up, as Allie said, you look yourself in the mirror, you go out there, you put the smile on your face, you go do the job better than anybody else. What happens behind closed doors, we're all human, right? But we can all do that, right? You gotta realize that you're not being judged every comment that you make and and sometimes you look great and sometimes you look like shit and sometimes you make sense and sometimes you said something stupid, right? You get it together and you decide that that's where you're going to head, and you go for it. And it's not going to work every day, right? But we're not sitting here. Both of us are a mess a lot of times.
Totally.
Total mess. I got friends who can tell you what a mess I am, right? So don't think it's you. It's not you. It's all of us. Every single one of us in the room is faking it sometime, some way.
And the important piece of that is being authentic to yourself.
Exactly.
And I think that's the only thing that you can control. It may look like that in the media, but recognize that what you see from the outside is not necessarily what's happening on the inside.
Right. Put that smile on your face and go do it.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much.